What if the peace you have been searching for was never somewhere ahead of you, but hidden beneath the expectations you never realized you were carrying? Every silent hope, every imagined outcome, every moment you tried to shape life into a perfect story slowly pulled your mind away from stillness. You believed calm would arrive when everything finally made sense, yet the more you reached for certainty, the more restless your heart became. Buddhist wisdom whispers something different, that silence is not emptiness. It is the place where the struggle gently dissolves. The moment you stop forcing life to obey your plans, a deeper awareness begins to rise. This is not about losing ambition or turning away from the world. It is about discovering a quiet strength that does not depend on control, a peace that appears when you finally loosen your grip and allow life to settle in its own natural rhythm. The invisible contract you never agreed to. Most expectations begin so quietly that you don't even notice them forming. From a young age, you start creating small ideas about how life should work. You believe people should understand your intentions without you explaining them. You believe hard work should always lead to clear rewards. You believe that if you are kind, others will always respond with the same kindness. None of these thoughts feel wrong at first, but slowly they turn into silent rules inside your mind. This is what Buddhism points to as an invisible contract. You never signed it, yet you carry it everywhere. It tells you how conversations should go, how relationships should feel, and how your future should unfold. The problem is not having hopes. The problem is believing that reality must follow those hopes exactly. When life moves in a different direction, it can feel like something unfair has happened to you. In truth, life is simply being unpredictable, but the mind interprets it as a personal failure or rejection. Imagine expecting a calm day, but suddenly plans change, or expecting someone to reply in a certain way, but they don't. The disappointment you feel often comes more from the expectation than from the situation itself. This is why Buddhist teachings speak about attachment to imagined outcomes. The mind holds tightly to a picture of how things should be, and when that picture breaks, tension appears instantly. Many people live under this invisible pressure for years without realizing it. They push themselves harder, judge others more quickly, and feel restless without knowing why. But the moment you begin to notice these hidden expectations, something shifts. You start seeing that much of your stress was not coming from the world. It was coming from the silent rules you created about how the world must behave. Recognizing this does not mean you stop caring about your goals or relationships. It simply means you begin to loosen the tight grip of "this must happen." When that grip softens, the heart feels lighter. You start meeting moments as they are instead of comparing them to a mental script. And in that space, the pressure you carried for so long begins to fade, replaced by a calm understanding that life does not owe you a perfect plan. It only invites you to experience what is real right now. The restlessness created by holding on. Holding on to expectations creates a kind of inner tension that many people don't recognize at first. It feels like constantly waiting for something to happen before you allow yourself to relax. You might tell yourself, "I'll feel calm when this problem is solved," or "I'll be happy when things finally go my way." Without realizing it, your peace becomes tied to future outcomes instead of the present moment. This habit slowly trains the mind to stay restless, always leaning forward, never fully settled. When you hold tightly to how life should unfold, every small change starts to feel heavy. A delayed message, an unexpected reaction, or a plan that shifts slightly can disturb your mood more than it needs to. The mind keeps checking reality against its expectations, like constantly comparing two images that never fully match. This comparison creates a quiet exhaustion. Even during peaceful moments, there is a hidden voice asking, "Is this enough? Is something better coming?" Because of this, the body may feel tense, and the thoughts may keep moving even when nothing urgent is happening. Buddhist wisdom explains that this restlessness comes from craving control. The mind believes that by holding on tightly to expectations, it can prevent disappointment. But the opposite usually happens. The tighter you hold, the more fragile your emotional state becomes. You start measuring your worth through outcomes, and every unexpected turn feels like a loss. Instead of flowing with life, you feel like you are constantly pushing against it, trying to force things into a shape that feels safe. Think about how often you replay conversations in your head, imagining how they should have gone differently, or how you worry about future results before they even arrive. This mental movement is not just thinking, it is holding on, and holding on keeps the mind busy even when there is nothing to solve. Over time, this constant mental activity drains your energy, making calmness feel distant. Buddhism does not suggest that you stop caring about your goals or your path. It simply invites you to notice when caring turns into clinging. There is a difference between moving forward with intention and gripping the future so tightly that you cannot breathe in the present. When you loosen your hold just a little, something surprising happens. The mind begins to slow down. You still take action, but without the heavy pressure that everything must go perfectly. Letting go of this tight grip does not happen all at once. It begins with small moments of awareness. When you notice yourself waiting for a perfect outcome, gently return your attention to what is happening right now. Feel your breath, notice your surroundings, and remind yourself that peace is not something you earn later. It is something you allow by releasing the constant need for certainty. As the habit of holding on begins to soften, the restlessness that once felt normal starts to fade. The mind learns that it does not need to chase the future to feel secure. Instead, it discovers a quieter strength, the ability to move through life without forcing every moment to match an expectation. And in that softening, a deeper sense of calm begins to grow, steady and natural, no longer dependent on what comes next. When silence exposes the real noise, many people believe silence is uncomfortable because it feels empty, but in truth, silence does not create discomfort. It reveals what is already happening inside the mind. When you are surrounded by constant sound, distractions, or conversation, your thoughts stay hidden behind movement. The moment everything becomes quiet, the inner world becomes clearer. Thoughts that were always present begin to surface, worries about the future, memories of the past, and expectations about how life should unfold. At first, this can feel overwhelming. You may notice how quickly the mind starts filling the silence with imagined conversations, plans, or doubts. This is what Buddhism describes as the restless nature of thinking. The noise you experience is not coming from silence itself. It is coming from the habits of the mind that were always there. Silence simply gives you the chance to see them more honestly. Many people try to escape this moment by reaching for their phones, turning on music, or distracting themselves with activity. It feels easier to avoid the inner noise than to face it. But Buddhist wisdom teaches that silence is not something to fear, it is a mirror. When you sit quietly and allow thoughts to appear without chasing or pushing them away, you begin to understand how much of your tension comes from constant mental movement. In silence, you may notice how often your mind returns to expectations. You replay moments, imagine better outcomes, or prepare for conversations that have not even happened yet. This shows how tightly the mind holds on to control. Instead of resting in what is real, it tries to create a version of reality that feels safer. Observing this pattern without judgment is one of the most powerful steps toward inner peace. The goal is not to force your mind to become empty. Buddhism does not teach that silence means stopping all thoughts. Instead, silence becomes a space where you stop reacting to every thought. You begin to watch them come and go, like clouds moving across the sky. Over time, this gentle observation weakens the power of expectations, because you are no longer feeding them with constant attention. As you grow more comfortable with silence, something subtle begins to change. The thoughts may still appear, but they lose their urgency. The need to control outcomes starts to fade, and a deeper awareness takes its place. You begin to notice small details, the rhythm of your breath, the feeling of stillness, the simplicity of being present. These moments may seem ordinary, but they carry a quiet strength that brings stability to the heart. Silence also teaches patience. When there is nothing to chase and nothing to prove, you learn to stay with what is unfolding right now. This patience softens the inner pressure created by expectations. Instead of rushing toward the next result, you begin to experience life as it happens, without adding extra weight to it. Over time, silence stops feeling like an empty space and starts feeling like a refuge. It becomes a place where clarity grows naturally, without force. The real noise, the constant pull of expectation and imagined control, slowly loses its intensity. And in that calm space you discover that peace was never hidden from you. It was simply waiting beneath the layers of mental noise, ready to appear the moment you allowed yourself to be still. Action without attachment. Many people believe that if they stop holding tightly to outcomes, they will lose motivation or direction. But Buddhist wisdom teaches something different. Action without attachment does not mean becoming passive or careless. It means giving your full effort while freeing your mind from the heavy pressure of needing a specific result. You still move forward, you still try your best, but your peace no longer depends on whether things unfold exactly as you imagined. Attachment often turns simple actions into emotional battles. When you expect a certain outcome, every step becomes filled with tension. You start overthinking small details, worrying about how things will be received, and questioning your own worth if results do not match your hopes. This kind of pressure slowly drains your energy. Instead of feeling focused, you feel exhausted before the journey even begins. Buddhism reminds us that suffering does not come from action itself, it comes from the craving attached to the result. Think about a time when you did something purely because you enjoyed it, without worrying about success or recognition. The experience likely felt lighter and more natural. You were present in the process, instead of being pulled toward the future. This is the essence of action without attachment. You allow effort to come from sincerity rather than fear. When expectations loosen, creativity grows because the mind is no longer trapped in constant comparison. Acting without attachment also changes the way you respond to challenges. When outcomes are not tied to your identity, mistakes feel less threatening. You become more willing to learn, adjust, and continue moving forward. Instead of seeing setbacks as proof that something is wrong with you, you begin to see them as part of the natural flow of life. This mindset brings a quiet resilience that is stronger than forced determination. Buddhist teachings often describe this approach as walking a middle path, fully engaged, yet inwardly free. You show up for your responsibilities, care deeply about what you do, and give your best effort. But at the same time, you release the need to control how everything ends. This balance allows action to become steady and calm, rather than rushed or desperate. One of the biggest shifts that happens when you practice action without attachment is the way you experience success and failure. Success no longer feels like a moment you must hold on to, and failure no longer feels like a collapse. Both become temporary experiences rather than permanent labels. The mind learns to stay grounded regardless of the outcome, and this stability creates a deeper sense of peace. Living this way does not mean you stop setting goals. It means your goals guide your direction instead of controlling your emotions. You work toward what matters to you, but you remain open to unexpected paths. Sometimes life offers results that are different from what you planned, yet equally meaningful. When you are not attached to a single outcome, you can recognize these new possibilities more easily. Over time, Action without attachment transforms the relationship you have with effort itself. Work feels less like a struggle and more like a natural expression of your values. You begin to trust the process rather than forcing the result. This trust does not come from certainty. It comes from understanding that peace is not found at the end of the journey, but within the way you walk it. As expectations soften, you may notice a quiet confidence growing inside you. You act because it feels true to who you are, not because you are chasing approval or trying to avoid disappointment. And in this gentle freedom, action becomes lighter, clearer, and deeply fulfilling, not because life always goes your way, but because your inner calm no longer depends on the outcome. How expectations quietly damage connections. Many of the struggles people face in relationships do not begin with conflict. They begin with silent expectations that are never spoken aloud. You may expect others to understand your feelings without explanation, to respond in ways that match your emotional needs, or to behave according to an image you created in your mind. These expectations often feel natural, yet they slowly place pressure on every connection. When reality does not match the picture you imagined, disappointment grows quietly beneath the surface. At first, this disappointment may seem small. You might feel slightly hurt when someone reacts differently than you hoped, or when they fail to notice something important to you. Over time, these small moments can build into distance. Instead of seeing the person clearly, you begin comparing them to an invisible standard they never agreed to meet. Buddhism teaches that suffering in relationships often comes from attachment to how we want others to be, rather than accepting who they truly are. Expectations can also create misunderstandings because they replace communication. When you assume someone should know what you need, you stop expressing yourself openly. This silence can make others feel confused or pressured, even when they genuinely care about you. The connection becomes less about shared understanding and more about unspoken rules. As these rules grow stronger, conversations may feel heavier and closeness can slowly fade. Another way expectations damage connections is through constant judgment. When someone's actions do not match what you expected, the mind quickly labels the situation as unfair or disappointing. You may start noticing only what feels lacking, instead of recognizing the effort that is already present. Buddhism encourages seeing others with clarity and compassion, understanding that everyone moves through life with their own fears, habits, and limitations. When expectations soften, it becomes easier to appreciate the person in front of you rather than the version you wished they would become. Letting go of expectations does not mean lowering your standards or accepting unhealthy behavior. It means removing the pressure that comes from trying to control another person's thoughts or actions. You begin to listen more deeply, speak more honestly, and allow space for natural growth within the relationship. This shift creates a sense of ease because both people are no longer trying to perform according to a silent script. One of the most powerful changes that happens when expectations fade is the return of genuine curiosity. Instead of assuming you know how someone should feel or act, you become open to discovering who they really are. Conversations become lighter because they are no longer filled with hidden demands. You start noticing small moments of kindness and connection that were once overlooked because your attention was focused on what was missing. Buddhist wisdom reminds us that every person is constantly changing, just like life itself. When you hold tightly to a fixed image of someone, you stop allowing that natural change to unfold. But when you release rigid expectations, relationships gain space to grow in unexpected ways. Compassion replaces pressure, and understanding replaces judgment. As this transformation happens, connections begin to feel more peaceful. You no longer carry the heavy task of making others fit your vision. Instead, you meet them where they are, with patience and openness. And in that openness, relationships become less about control and more about shared presence, a quiet harmony that arises when expectations loosen and genuine connection is allowed to breathe. The freedom of not needing guarantees. The human mind naturally searches for certainty. It wants clear signs that everything will work out, that effort will always lead to success, and that the future will follow a safe and predictable path. This desire for guarantees often feels comforting at first, but over time it creates a hidden pressure. You begin waiting for proof before allowing yourself to feel calm. You tell yourself that peace will come once things are fully secure. Yet life rarely offers complete certainty, and the more you chase guarantees, the more restless the heart becomes. Many people build their decisions around the hope of avoiding risk or disappointment. They hesitate to move forward unless they feel sure about the outcome. Buddhism teaches that this search for guarantees is one of the ways the mind tries to protect itself from uncertainty. But instead of creating safety, it keeps you trapped in constant anticipation. You start measuring every step by how predictable it feels, rather than by what feels meaningful or true. Think about how often you replay different scenarios in your mind, trying to calculate the safest path. This mental habit can make even simple choices feel heavy. The fear of making the wrong move grows stronger because the mind believes there is a perfect outcome waiting somewhere ahead. When that perfect certainty does not appear, frustration and doubt begin to take its place. Buddhism gently reminds us that life is always changing, and expecting permanent guarantees from a changing world creates unnecessary tension. Letting go of the need for guarantees does not mean becoming careless or ignoring responsibility. It means accepting that not everything can be controlled or predicted. Instead of waiting for complete certainty, you begin to trust your ability to adapt and respond. This trust brings a quiet freedom. You no longer feel stuck between fear of failure and the need for perfect timing. You move forward with awareness, knowing that uncertainty is a natural part of growth. When you release the demand for guarantees, your relationship with the future begins to change. Instead of seeing it as something you must control, you start viewing it as a space of possibility. The mind becomes more flexible, and your actions feel lighter because they are no longer tied to rigid expectations. You begin to notice that many of your past worries never unfolded the way you imagined. This realization softens the urge to predict every detail of what lies ahead. Buddhist teachings often encourage focusing on what can be done in this moment, rather than chasing certainty about what will happen later. By returning your attention to the present, you create stability that does not depend on promises or outcomes. Each step becomes meaningful on its own, without needing to guarantee a specific result. This shift reduces anxiety because your sense of peace comes from how you walk the path, not from where you believe it must lead. Another powerful change that comes from releasing guarantees is the growth of courage. When you stop waiting for perfect assurance, you begin to take actions that align more deeply with your values. You learn that strength does not come from controlling every possibility, but from meeting life with openness and resilience. Even challenges begin to feel less overwhelming because you trust yourself to learn from whatever arises. Over time, the freedom of not needing guarantees transforms the way you experience uncertainty. What once felt like a threat begins to feel like a natural part of life's rhythm. You become less afraid of change because you no longer demand that everything remain fixed. Peace grows not from knowing exactly what will happen, but from understanding that you can remain steady even when the future is unknown. And in that steady awareness, a deeper sense of freedom quietly takes root, allowing you to move forward with calm confidence instead of constant worry. Acceptance as inner stability. Acceptance is often misunderstood as weakness or surrender, but in Buddhist wisdom it represents one of the strongest forms of inner balance. Acceptance does not mean you stop caring or that you approve of everything that happens. It means you see reality clearly without fighting against it inside your mind. Many people believe peace will come only when life changes, yet acceptance teaches that stability begins when your response to life becomes calm, even while circumstances continue to shift. When expectations are strong, the mind constantly argues with what is already real. You replay events, wishing they had gone differently, or resist situations that you cannot immediately change. This inner resistance creates emotional turbulence. The body may feel tense, and thoughts move quickly as you search for a way to regain control. Buddhism explains that suffering often grows from this resistance, not from the situation itself. Acceptance softens this struggle by allowing you to meet each moment without adding extra conflict. Learning acceptance begins with awareness. You notice your reactions without judging them. Instead of pushing away discomfort, you allow yourself to observe it with patience. This does not make challenges disappear, but it changes how deeply they disturb you. When you stop fighting reality internally, your energy is no longer drained by constant resistance. The mind becomes steadier, and decisions begin to come from clarity rather than emotional pressure. Acceptance also creates space for wiser action. When you see a situation clearly, without exaggerating or denying it, you are able to respond more thoughtfully. For example, if a plan changes unexpectedly, acceptance allows you to adjust calmly instead of reacting with frustration. Buddhism teaches that acceptance is not the end of effort. It is the foundation that allows effort to be skillful and balanced. From this grounded place, you act with intention instead of reacting from fear. One of the reasons acceptance feels difficult is because the mind believes it must always control the outcome to feel safe. Letting go of that control can feel unfamiliar at first. Yet over time, acceptance becomes a source of quiet strength. You begin to trust that you can face life as it is, without needing everything to match your expectations. This trust creates a sense of inner stability that remains steady even when external circumstances change. As acceptance deepens, your relationship with emotions begins to transform. Instead of pushing away sadness or clinging to moments of happiness, you allow feelings to move naturally. Buddhism teaches that emotions are temporary experiences, not permanent definitions of who you are. Acceptance allows you to feel fully without becoming overwhelmed. You learn to stay present with what arises, knowing that every experience will eventually shift. Acceptance also brings clarity to relationships and personal growth. When you accept people as they are, you stop trying to force them into roles that fit your expectations. This does not mean you ignore your boundaries or values. It simply means you see others with honesty instead of projection. The same understanding applies to yourself. Acceptance allows you to recognize your strengths and weaknesses without harsh judgment, creating a healthier path for change. Over time, acceptance becomes a steady ground beneath your life. Instead of feeling shaken by every unexpected event, you carry a calm awareness that remains stable through change. Buddhism describes this stability as a deep form of peace, not a temporary feeling, but a way of being that grows stronger with practice. The more you accept what is present, the less energy is wasted resisting it, and the more space you create for wisdom and compassion to guide your actions. In this way, acceptance is not about giving up on life. It is about standing firmly within it, with a quiet strength that does not depend on perfection. When expectations loosen and acceptance grows, the heart begins to settle. You discover that stability does not come from controlling the world around you, but from learning to meet each moment with calm understanding. The ego says need to be rewarded. Deep inside the mind, there is a quiet voice that wants to be seen, appreciated, and confirmed. This voice is often connected to what Buddhism calls the ego, not in a negative or harsh way, but as the part of us that builds identity around achievement, recognition, and approval. The ego believes that if effort is not rewarded, then something must be wrong. Because of this, many expectations are not only about outcomes, but about how those outcomes reflect personal worth. From a young age, people learn to associate praise with success. When something goes well, approval arrives, and the mind begins to chase that feeling again. Over time, this creates a pattern where actions are driven by the hope of being rewarded, whether through attention, validation, or a sense of importance. At first, this may feel motivating, but Buddhist wisdom explains that relying too heavily on external reward makes peace fragile. When recognition does not appear, disappointment quickly takes its place. The ego's need for reward often hides behind good intentions. You might help someone sincerely, yet still feel hurt if your effort goes unnoticed. You might work hard toward a goal, only to feel empty when the result does not bring the satisfaction you expected. This happens because the mind quietly attaches identity to outcomes. Instead of seeing actions as expressions of who you are, they become proof that you are valuable. When that proof feels uncertain, restlessness grows. Buddhism teaches that this cycle creates a constant search for more. Even when rewards arrive, the feeling rarely lasts long. The mind quickly moves to the next goal, the next recognition, the next moment of approval. This endless movement keeps peace just out of reach. It is not that achievements are wrong or that appreciation should be avoided. Rather, the suffering comes from believing that your worth depends on these things. Letting go of the ego's need to be rewarded begins with noticing the intention behind your actions. Ask yourself gently, am I doing this to express something true within me, or am I hoping it will confirm my value? This awareness does not require judgment. It simply invites honesty. When you begin to act from sincerity instead of seeking constant validation, your actions feel lighter and more natural. You still care deeply, but your emotional balance is no longer controlled by how others respond. One powerful shift that happens when the ego softens is the ability to experience effort itself as meaningful. Instead of waiting for a reward at the end, you begin to appreciate the process. A conversation becomes valuable because it is honest, not because it earns praise. Work becomes fulfilling because it reflects your values, not because it guarantees recognition. Buddhism describes this as acting with right intention, moving through life with awareness rather than attachment. Releasing the need for reward also changes how you handle failure. When the ego is strong, failure feels like a threat to identity. But when attachment loosens, mistakes become opportunities to learn rather than reasons to doubt yourself. You become more open to growth because your worth no longer depends on perfection. This creates a deeper resilience that does not rise and fall with every outcome. As this transformation continues, a quiet sense of contentment begins to appear. You may notice that simple moments feel more complete because they are not being measured against expectations. The need to compare yourself with others begins to fade, and with it, a great deal of inner pressure disappears. Buddhism teaches that true fulfillment arises when actions come from presence rather than from the desire to be rewarded. In time, the ego's demand for constant recognition loses its intensity. What remains is a calmer awareness, one that allows you to give your effort freely without tying it to personal proof. Peace grows not because rewards stop existing, but because your heart no longer depends on them. And in that freedom, you discover a deeper kind of satisfaction, one that comes from simply being aligned with your own intention rather than chasing approval from the world. Discovering peace inside you. Uncertainty. Uncertainty is something most people try to avoid. The mind naturally searches for clear answers, stable plans and predictable outcomes because it believes that certainty will create safety. When the future feels unclear, anxiety can rise quickly. You may find yourself thinking about every possible scenario, trying to prepare for what might happen. Yet Buddhism teaches that uncertainty is not a mistake in life. It is a natural part of existence. Everything changes, and trying to hold on to complete control often creates more tension than peace. Many expectations are built as a way to escape uncertainty. You imagine how things should unfold because it gives the mind a temporary feeling of control, but when reality moves in a different direction, fear appears. The problem is not the uncertainty itself, it is the resistance to it. When you stop fighting the unknown, you begin to see that uncertainty carries space for growth, new understanding, and unexpected paths. At first, accepting uncertainty can feel uncomfortable. The mind may ask, how can I feel calm if I don't know what will happen? Buddhism answers this gently by shifting focus away from the future and back to the present moment. Instead of trying to predict everything, you learn to strengthen your awareness of what is happening right now. Each breath, each step, each small action becomes an anchor that brings stability even when the future feels open and undefined. Uncertainty also teaches patience. When outcomes are not guaranteed, you begin to move more slowly and thoughtfully. You listen more deeply, observe more carefully, and allow life to unfold without rushing to force an answer. This patience creates a different kind of peace, not the peace of knowing everything, but the peace of trusting your ability to adapt. You realize that calmness does not come from having all the answers, it comes from learning how to stay steady without them. Another powerful change happens when you stop seeing uncertainty as a threat. Instead of imagining only negative possibilities, you begin to notice that the unknown also holds opportunity. Some of the most meaningful moments in life arrive without warning. New relationships, unexpected lessons, and personal growth often appear when plans do not go exactly as expected. Buddhism encourages openness to these possibilities, reminding us that life's unpredictability is not always an obstacle. It can also be a teacher. Living with uncertainty does not mean abandoning preparation or responsibility. You can still plan and set intentions, but you do so with flexibility. Plans become gentle directions rather than rigid rules. When circumstances change, you adjust without feeling broken or defeated. This flexibility brings emotional resilience because your sense of peace is no longer tied to one fixed outcome. As you practice staying present within uncertainty, you may notice that your mind becomes quieter. The urge to constantly predict or control begins to soften. Instead of rushing toward a distant result, you begin to appreciate the unfolding of each moment. This awareness brings a feeling of spaciousness, as if life has more room to breathe. Even difficult situations feel more manageable because you are not carrying the extra weight of demanding certainty. Over time, discovering peace inside uncertainty transforms the way you see the future. You no longer wait for perfect clarity before allowing yourself to feel calm. Instead, calmness grows from within, supported by awareness and acceptance. Buddhism teaches that true stability does not come from controlling what lies ahead, but from developing a mind that can remain balanced through change. In this way, uncertainty becomes less of an enemy and more of a companion on your path. It reminds you that life is alive, always moving, always opening new possibilities. When expectations loosen and trust grows, you realize that peace is not found by eliminating the unknown. It is found by learning to walk gently within it, step by step, with a steady and open heart. When nothing is forced, everything settles. There is a quiet shift that begins to happen when you stop forcing life to match your expectations. For a long time, the mind believes that peace will only come through effort, control, and constant pushing. You try to make conversations go a certain way, you try to shape outcomes before they arrive, and you try to hold on to moments that feel good. But slowly, through awareness and practice, you begin to notice that the more you force, the more restless you feel. Buddhism teaches that true calm does not come from tightening your grip on life. It comes from learning when to soften it. When nothing is forced, the mind begins to slow down naturally. Thoughts still appear, plans still exist, and goals still matter, but there is less urgency behind them. You no longer feel the need to rush toward a result just to feel secure. This does not mean life becomes passive or directionless. Instead, actions begin to flow from clarity rather than pressure. You move forward with intention, yet without the heavy demand that everything must unfold perfectly. One of the first changes you may notice is a sense of lightness in everyday moments. Small challenges do not carry the same emotional weight because you are no longer fighting them internally. If a plan changes, you adjust. If a conversation does not go as expected, you listen instead of reacting immediately. Buddhism describes this as moving in harmony with reality rather than pushing against it. This harmony creates space for peace to settle quietly within you. Letting go of force also transforms the way you experience time. When expectations drive your actions, the future feels urgent and the present feels incomplete. But when you release the need to control every outcome, each moment begins to feel whole on its own. You notice details that once felt invisible: the rhythm of your breath, the calm between thoughts, the simple presence of being alive. These small experiences create a steady sense of grounding that does not depend on what comes next. Another important change happens in your emotional world. When you stop forcing happiness or resisting discomfort, emotions begin to move more freely. You allow joy to come and go without clinging to it, and you allow difficulty to pass without turning it into a personal struggle. Buddhism teaches that peace grows when you stop trying to hold on to or push away every feeling. The heart becomes more spacious, able to experience life fully without becoming overwhelmed. As this state deepens, relationships also begin to feel more natural. Without forcing others to meet your expectations, you listen more openly and respond more gently. Conversations lose the tension of hidden demands. You start to notice that connection feels stronger when it is allowed to unfold naturally rather than being shaped by pressure. This ease reflects the inner calm that has begun to settle within you. Many people fear that releasing force will lead to losing ambition or direction. In reality, the opposite often happens. When you are not overwhelmed by expectation, your energy becomes clearer and more focused. You act because something feels meaningful, not because you are trying to escape discomfort or prove your worth. This quiet confidence allows you to move through challenges with patience instead of urgency. Over time, the absence of force reveals a deeper truth. Peace was never something you needed to chase or create through effort alone. It was always present beneath the layers of tension, waiting for the mind to relax. When expectations soften and control loosens, the heart begins to settle naturally, like water becoming still after movement stops. Buddhism reminds us that this settling is not a final destination. It is a way of living, a gentle rhythm that continues to grow with awareness. In this calm state, life no longer feels like something you must conquer. It becomes something you walk through with openness and balance. You continue to act, to care, and to grow, but without the constant pressure to shape every moment according to your desires. And as nothing is forced, everything within you begins to find its own natural place. Thoughts slow down, emotions soften, and a quiet, steady peace finally settles into the spaces that once felt restless. Maybe peace was never hiding somewhere far away. Maybe it was always waiting behind the expectations you carried, behind the pressure to control what could never be fully controlled. Every moment you tried to force life into a perfect shape, your mind grew heavier. And every moment you learned to soften your grip, something inside you began to breathe again. Buddhist wisdom does not ask you to stop living, stop caring, or stop moving forward. It only asks you to see clearly, to notice how much of your suffering came from holding too tightly to how things should be. When you release that quiet struggle, life does not become empty. It becomes lighter, more honest, more real. You may still face uncertainty. You may still experience change and challenge, but now you walk differently. You no longer chase peace as if it is somewhere ahead of you. You carry it in the way you listen, in the way you act without attachment, and in the way you allow silence to guide you instead of fear. So as this moment ends, do not rush to find answers. Just pause, breathe. Notice the space within you that does not need guarantees, that does not need constant reward, that does not need to force anything to settle. That quiet space is not weakness. It is strength without noise. And perhaps the greatest realization is this: the peace you were searching for was never waiting at the end of expectation. It begins the day you gently release it, and in that release you finally come home to a calm that was always yours.